This data points to the conclusion that the growth rate in UPA 1 and 2 was far higher than the growth rate in NDA 1 and 2. Is that a wrong conclusion?
NDA 1 handed over the baton to UPA 1 at growth rates of about over 8% and rising. UPA 2 passed it on to NDA 2 at 6%. Are you using facts selectively?
No. Please understand, in the 5 years of NDA 1, the growth was less than 5% in 2 years, just barely 5% in 1 year, and crossed 7 and crossed 8 in 1 year each. The 8.08, which the new report says, based on market prices, is upon previous year of 3.73.
So there was a base year impact.
The base year was so low that any growth will show up very high, 8.08. That is why we take the average of the 5 years, and the average of the 5 years comes to 5.68. And I have done nothing more than take the average of UPA 1, 8.36, and the average of UPA 2, 7.68. So what is wrong about this calculation? You don't take one odd year out of 5 and say we handed over a baton. The economy was certainly not rising.
This 8.08 wasn't a flash in the pan. It
Who
was
said?
an economy on the upswing.
Did I use the word
No,
flash
you
in
did
the
not.
pan? All I said is 8.08 is a bit of an exaggeration because it's based on a very low base, a 3.73. When you look at the other 4 numbers, 8.15 is upon 8.08. 9.6 is upon 8.15. 9.7 is upon 9.6. 10.23 is upon 9.7. The clear rise was in UPA 1 the first 4 years, which Dr. Arvind Subramanian, until recently the chief economic advisor, said the boom years.
That one of the allegations that's coming from the Congress is that the Modi government, which is the present NDA 2, has been blessed with a very benign oil regime, and yet they could not capitalize on it too much. The reality is that you were also blessed with very heady global growth in terms of exports. The average export growth in UPA 1 and UPA 2 was upwards of 12%. We all know exports has slumped, and that's a big driver of engine, is it not? So they may have been benefited with oil, but they've been at the receiving end of exports.
The difference is we had a benign or helpful external environment.
That's right.
And we made use of it. They had an equally benign external environment because of a crash in oil prices, crash in commodity prices, and they did not make use of it. That's the difference.
Rajiv Kumar of the Niti Aayog, Vice Chairman there, says that the higher growth rate in 2009 to 2011 and in previous years was funded by untenable fiscal deficit and reckless expansion of bank credit. I'll come to bank credit in just a while. But was the response to the global economic crisis the fiscal steroid, and the economy was growing on the back of that?
I have to take exception to the words "and previous years." Prior to 2009-10, there was no reckless spending, there was no reckless borrowing. So he's wrong there. The growth that was achieved between 2004-5 and 2007-8 was based on prudent fiscal management. 2008-9 was the worst international financial crisis since the Great Depression. In fact, it is called the Great Recession. We managed it competently. Our growth slumped. The world growth crashed. Most countries had negative growth. Yet we registered 4.15 under the new series market prices, 7.16 under the old series, be that as it may.
Yes.
Then Mr. Mukherjee took over. I left the finance ministry. Mr. Mukherjee took over. Now, you can argue whether one fiscal stimulus was good, the second was good, the third was necessary. You can argue. But to be fair to Mr. Mukherjee, he followed the textbook. What did the textbook say? The textbook says, in times of a decline in growth, a decline in investment, private investment, the textbook says, spend more. Keynesian, spend more. So he did relax the fiscal deficit limits, he did borrow, and he did spend. That did cause high fiscal deficit and high inflation. But the positive was that we revived growth, and we had growth of 8.84, 10.78, and 6.96 until the European crisis hit us. Whoever would have been in place in Mr. Mukherjee's place, I don't know what he would have done differently.
What would you have done? Would you have gone for this, if I may say, and I'm using my words very carefully, would you have gone for reckless spending?
It was not reckless spending, it was public spending.
Look at fiscal deficit levels, those went up, they were shot through the roof.
That is excessive borrowing, but the spending was genuine spending.
Would you have done that?
Well, it's hindsight. I have the benefit of hindsight. I would have done the first fiscal stimulus package. I would have held back on the second. And certainly I would not have done a third package. But then a finance minister has to be eventually guided by the Prime Minister.
So are you saying Dr. Manmohan Singh was responsible for high fiscal deficit?
No, I didn't say that. I said the finance minister.
You can't divorce the finance ministry from your tenure to Mr. Mukherjee's tenure.
Not.
This was one government. No, you're not. No, you're not. But this is one government that was continuing in power.
That's what I'm trying to explain.
So you can't look at growth figures in isolation of high inflation and high fiscal deficit.
I'm only saying that Mr. Mukherjee followed the textbook. Therefore, you can't fault him. In hindsight, if you have the benefit of hindsight, I think it's possible to argue, as Dr. Srinivasan has argued, that the first stimulus package was necessary. The second was, you could take a call one way or other. And the third was perhaps avoidable. But that's a viewpoint. One must respect that, and one must learn lessons for the future.
Don't you think there was indiscriminate lending that happened because of the fiscal steroids?
No, I don't agree. I don't agree. What is wrong with 14% credit growth? What is wrong is the current credit growth has slumped to 8.27% in 2017-18. Only now it's picked up. It's now crossed 12%. Now suppose this credit growth picks up further and goes to 14%. Would you call it reckless credit growth?
They say that we have to deal with the legacy of massive NPAs,
there we go,
deleveraging of bank credit, and uncertain global trade environment where exports have slipped.
Listen,
and a world that's increasingly looking inwards.
At no time will all factors be in your favor. There will always be some factor or other which is against you. You must know how to manage. I shudder to think what they would have done if they were in office in 2008 and the international financial crisis hit them. Why don't you give credit to Dr. Manmohan Singh?
Or oil at 140.
Yeah, 145 the first week of July 2008. Therefore, why don't you give credit to Dr. Manmohan Singh and his government for managing the most challenging economic environment the world has faced in 50 years. 1,000 banks collapsed in the US alone. In England, banks collapsed. In Germany, a bank collapsed. Not one bank collapsed in India.
You've known to be fiscally prudent to the point that people may even call you a fiscal hawk.
But I did tighten the fiscal deficit in the 1.5 years that I had before elections.
Yes.
I did contain the current account deficit to 1.7. What is the current account deficit now? At the end of 2017-18, current account deficit had touched 2%.
That's right.
I had contained it to 1.7%. And this year I'm told 2018-19, current account deficit will cross 2%, may even go up to 2.3 or 2.4.
So that's exactly the point. You were fiscally prudent in hindsight, and we have the benefit of hindsight now. You're proud of the growth numbers that you produce, but are you equally proud of the inflation and the fiscal?
No, I'm not. I'm not. That's what I'm trying to say. We had to stimulate the economy. We paid a price in terms of high inflation and high fiscal deficit. But in the year and a half that I had, I did contain the fiscal deficit sharply, and I did contain the current account deficit to very, very creditable limits.
You're also blamed for cutting down on spending.
What choice did you have? You can't have everything. You can't say, I'll contain the fiscal deficit, I'll contain the current account deficit, but I will spend. You would have called me also reckless. You can't have everything. it is every decision is contextual. Every decision is based upon how you find the economy at any given time.
Was high inflation a big red in your report card?
I think so. I think high inflation was a big red in the UPA 2 report card.
Your party has accused the government of pushing and doing the unthinkable, which is pushing the rupee beyond 70. But isn't the exchange rate a function of global factors, just like it was in 2013? Just like you were falsely accused in 2013, are you just returning the favor today?
No, I won't comment on the exchange rate.
Because you agree with them?
I won't comment on the exchange rate. But all I would say is, what did you say before you came to power? Both candidate Mr. Narendra Modi and the leader of the opposition, Ms. Sushma Swaraj, are on record that if they come to power, the rupee will trade at 40 rupees to a dollar. So we are only holding the mirror to them and say, this is what you said and this is what you are delivering. Please explain why.
But as somebody who's been at the helm in finance ministry, do you sympathize with the fact that
why are you asking me this question?
That rupee management is beyond their control? It's global factors, and
right.
EM currencies have lost clout. A dollar is strengthening.
You are asking the question to the wrong person. I didn't promise 40 rupees a dollar. They did. Be that as it may. I am willing to concede that the exchange rate is not entirely under the control of the government. But clearly, there are some things which can be done to offset the depreciation of the exchange rate so that we are not hit by price rise, we are not hit by import compression, we are not hit by high deficits. What are you doing to offset the negative effects of a depreciating rupee?
NDA 2 has done the big reset with IBC, the NCLT, GST gradually moving to what you would have envisaged it to be. Will you concede, like some people in the BJP and the government do, that they have laid the foundation for more sustainable high growth?
Well, if they are good in laying foundations, now that they have laid the foundation, let them make way for somebody who can build a mansion.